Hello fellow amped gardeners, how are you guys doing today? I hope the quarantine is treating you well. So today I'm going to start talking about mead making. I actually got interested in mead making because I saw a video where somebody had taken a bottle a lot like this, put some honey in it, threw in the yeast, stuck a balloon on the top of it, popped a hole in it, and let it set. And I was thinking, that doesn't seem right. It would, as much as people go crazy about mead at Ren fairs and at Amped, it can't be that easy to make. So I started doing some research, and today the stuff I'm going to talk to you about is actually the equipment and the terminology that you will need when you're doing mead making, so that you can make much better quality mead than that. First term is carboy. A carboy is a rounded glass vessel with a narrow neck. Currently, these are the most popular types right here. This will hold 1 gallon worth of mead. The other type looks closer to the water fountain jugs of water. They hold 5 gallons. I'm actually moving up to that this month. So when you're making mead, one of the things you're going to hear is a must. A must is food for the yeast, as well as honey and water. Before you put the yeast in, that mixture is called a must. Now, after you add your yeast into it, you're going to fill it up about here. 15 to 20 days later, you're going to have stuff on the bottom. That stuff on the bottom is the colony of yeast is going to just keep growing, and some of it will die out and it'll settle to the bottom, and the particulate matter is called lees. After about 15 days to 20 days, when you got a decent amount of lees there, you will use a siphon pump to take it from one bottle into a clean bottle. You don't want to let it sit on lees for too long, as it does change the flavor of your mead just slightly. It doesn't make it any worse mead. It's still going to be the same alcohol content, but it can add a souring flavor, like sourdough bread. So when you're actually transferring from one bottle into another bottle, that is called racking. When you are done with your racking, that is your primary fermentation. After you're done with that, it's then called secondary fermentation. Your yeast will still be eating, it will still be making more lees, it will still be changing the sugars into alcohol, but it's the secondary bottle, so they call it secondary fermentation. You can do what's called step feeding. If you take measurements on it and it doesn't have the alcohol content that you want, you can keep adding little bits of sugar, a little bit more honey, different types of fruit, and you can increase the amount of sugars that the yeast has to eat so that you can get a stronger brew. The next thing would be headspace. Headspace is just the air between the top of your liquid and the bottom of this little stopper, which we call a bung. Okay? This is an airlock. When you're doing things, your yeast, whether it's feeding it or stirring it up, it can start foaming, just like shaking a beer bottle, and it can fill all the way up to here and even spill into your airlock. So you kind of want to avoid that stuff. That's why you leave a little bit of headspace in there. An airlock, very important piece of equipment. It keeps you from letting bugs, hair, dander, germs, everything else. Keeps it out of your actual mead so that you have good quality mead. Alright, so the equipment that you're going to need is a carboy. Amazon right now is selling 4-packs for $32. I am making 2 gallons of mead at a time, and so I need to buy 4 bottles for each batch that I'm making. I'm sure that if you're thrifty and you move things around a bit, you can probably make 3 bottles of mead with 1 extra if you buy that 4-pack. Our local homebrew store, it's called Homebrew and Winemaking. It's over on West Charleston here in Vegas. This guy is very friendly, extremely knowledgeable, will walk you through any of the steps. If you've got questions about anything, I know I've gone to him several times. He's been doing this for almost 3 decades. He's a good guy. I would highly recommend him, and his prices are very, very similar to Amazon. And if you shop there, you're supporting a local business. The thing that I was talking about earlier about the plastic bottle being used, I was correct. That's not the best way to do it. The little pinhole in the balloon can let things through. It can pop off. There's just all kinds of ways that it can go wrong. And who wants to drink something that tastes like a rubber? The bottles that we get for our water, the type of plastic that they're made from, is not designed for alcohol. So as your mead is processing and it is becoming more alcoholic, it will leach into the plastic, and as you pour it out and you transfer it from one thing to another, it will actually pull some of those plastics and that taste and that chemical residue into your mead. So, I mean, if that's the kind of mead you want to make, I mean, go for it. It's cheap, but I wouldn't do that. Get the carboys. Okay, so another thing I need to mention is about shaking these. So I've said that these are non-pressure. Okay, you can't put pressure into these bottles. If you do, they have big seams. They are not, this type of glass is not designed for pressure. It will shatter, it will burst, it will break pieces off. It can be quite catastrophic. When I first started making mead, I had a friend tell me, oh, you should shake it up, every day for the first couple of days. Make sure you get it aerated. So I did. And then I lost a full wine bottle worth of mead because I was wearing it. It sprayed all out the top, all over everything. It was horrible. It was literally like shaking a can of beer and then opening it. It went everywhere. I was making my 1/8 gallon of mead, had the honey in, had the warm water, and I was shaking it around, and the entire top part of the bottle busted off. I went over and bought a new bottle from the homebrew store and explained to him what happened, and he was quite aghast. He was surprised that it had taken that long for a catastrophic failure of the bottles. They're not designed for that. So if you're shaking them, if you're trying to put any kind of pressure on them at all, you are looking at making a bomb. You're going to have glass shards going everywhere, along with either must or with lees and alcohol. It's just all over the place. It's not good. Okay, so when you're stirring it, you get something like this. I got this from the homebrew store. It was about $5. This will obviously not fit in this carboy. It's not designed for this side. This is actually for the 5-gallon or the actual tubs if you're making beer. But if you stick this side in, you can stir and make sure you get all the little honey up and around, and everything's fine. It'll keep everything safe. Now, this is a bung. After you've got your final bit of yeast poured into it, what you're going to wind up doing is you will take some paper towel. You're going to wipe out the very inside lip of the carboy. These should have been soaking in disinfectant, which I've got to still talk about. You'll dry this off. It has to be really well dried and put it once it's in here. As the yeast is fermenting, it's going to try to make pressure, and if you don't have it dry enough, it will work its way out. And if it falls out and you're not paying attention, now it's sitting open and exposed to who knows what, and it's just a bad day. You're risking your entire batch of mead because you didn't take 5 seconds to dry it off. This is an airlock. It's basically a straight tube. You fill either a off-brand of alcohol that you don't like, not rubbing alcohol, but I mean like food-safe drinking alcohol, or what I use is I use Star San sanitizer. Fill it up to this line. Take this, put it in here. As air is coming up, it'll bubble up and out, and there's a bunch of little tiny holes in here. So it sits there and it just bubbles. It keeps bugs, it keeps hair, it keeps dirt, it keeps debris, it keeps bacteria and everything else from going into your mead mix. Because remember, then it keeps pressure from building up in here. Because remember, that's very dangerous. There is another type of airlock, and it is sort of an S shape. I've gotten away from those because if it does overflow into that S shape, cleaning those out take a lot longer than simply popping off the top, dipping it in sanitizer, running a scrubber through it, putting it back together. I mean, there's literally, you got to use one of those old-fashioned fuzzy hooks. Okay, so there's that. Speaking about cleaning, after you get done with your primary fermentation, you've cleaned out and sanitized your bottle. You've transferred it into that new bottle. So now you've got a dirty bottle. It's going to have lees on the bottom. It's going to have dried leasing around the top. So the easiest way to do it, fill it with nice hot water, wash, pour, remember no lid. Do it a couple of times. Then you're going to take one of these, which only cost, I think it was $2.50 at the homebrew store, and you'll what I normally do is after I've rinsed it out a couple of times with hot water, I'll put in some of the sanitizer fluid, and then you can come up here and you can get around the upper edges and around the bottom edges to make sure that you got all of everything taken care of. Cleanliness, because you don't want to get a bacterial infection inside your mead, which will then spoil it, make it either unhealthy to drink or turn it into vinegar, which isn't your goal if you're making mead. I've talked a bit about sanitizer without showing you sanitizer. So this is Star San. This cost $18.95 at the homebrew store, costs about the same on Amazon. You got a little gradient measuring thing here. This 1/2 mark makes a gallon of sanitizer. So you just squeeze it, it pours into there, and then you use that to pour it in. I'm on my 10th batch of mead, which means I've had to do 10 bottle cleanings and then the subsequent varying bottles, so that's another 10 bottles that I've had to clean out. So it's sitting at this. That's all I've used of this, because it lasts for a really long time. It'll come out and it'll look like this. This basically what it is. It's a high acid content, so that it kills everything off in just a few seconds. One of the reasons I would say to get the 4 carboys is because, as you see, I've only got about this much left in this particular batch. This is from cleaning out the other 4 bottles. It's also from being stored in a large tub, which I soak my other bits of equipment. All of these things go in that sanitizing fluid, and then afterwards I put it back in the bottle because it can be held, and I even use it to fill up my little containers. Star San, it's well worth the price because you don't want to put an infection on anything. All right, so with the carboys, very small bottle neck. Buy a funnel. They're $1.95, $2. You're literally going to be pouring honey into this, and every bit of honey that you add into here, it's more food for the yeast. It's more alcohol that it can be made. If, and I've done it before, you're sitting up here with a quart jar of honey and you're skilled, you can aim through and not spill any, but anything that comes on here, it's wasted mead. You're literally not feeding the yeast. It's not going to make any alcohol from that. It's just not worth not having them. Now, we were talking about transferring from primary fermentation into secondary fermentation. This is your siphon pump, and what you'll do normally is that jar would be full of sanitizer, so I would go from the jar with the sanitizer, dip it in, get a couple of good pumps, and put it into the empty carboy. That allows this whole thing to be cleaned out, and I transfer it over, and then at the very last second I'll put the funnel there and dump the last little dregs of the sanitizer out into the other carboy. I then have a clean and sanitized carboy ready for primary into secondary racking. Now, I'm going to be making a second video tomorrow because I've got my racking scheduled for tomorrow. So I'm actually going to make my videos a little out of sync. The next time I go and make actual mead, I will go through a video showing the step-by-step process of picking the honeys, picking the yeast, putting it into the carboy, getting the water heated up properly, and getting them into their first the first carboys. But I've already got a set right here, a little bit off camera, of mead that I started just about 14 and a half days ago that will need to be transferred from the jars they're in currently into fresh, clean carboys, which is why these two are sitting out here. Okay, so let's talk about food. This is a completely extra thing. You don't have to do this. Some people will take raisins and slice them up and toss them into their mead because it adds certain nutrients to it. It's usually like 6 raisins per gallon of mead. You can do it that way, or you can go with something like this. Now, this is Fermax. It is yeast food. All it is nutrients for the yeast, which yeast are a single cell organism that eat sugar and make alcohol. This was $13 for a 1 pound bag, and the way you do it with this particular brand you take a half teaspoon. For me, when I'm making my meads, I'll take my half teaspoon, I'll put it in, then I'll put in the 3 pounds of honey. After I got the 3 pounds of honey, I put in warm water, stir, add in more water to cool it down a little bit more, and then, which I'll show you in the other video, then you airlock it and it's done. But with this food, you put some in the first day that you've made it. Then you skip a day. The next day, you put in another half teaspoon. Then you skip a day. Then you put in, on the last day, you put in another scoop. What is good to do during this particular part of the process is, which is why I'm almost out of sanitizer, because I run sanitizer over this before it goes into the mead every single time. So you'll go in there. This is plastic. It's non-porous. You don't want to use wood. Wood will hold any of the yeasts, which can cause a bacterial infection, no matter how much you want to try to clean it. So don't use wood. This is just the easiest way to do it. So you go in there and you'll stir it up. The first 3 to 4 days, it's okay to stir because the yeast is eating in an aerobic fashion. It's eating and it's making more. Once you've got that airlock on there and you haven't taken it off for a while, they're going to be making so much carbon dioxide that they'll push all of the oxygen out. Then they go into an anaerobic state and they're just eating. They're not making any more. They're eating and they're making alcohol and more carbon dioxide. So this is one of the reasons we use our siphon pump, because when you're transferring, when you're in your secondary fermentation, if you add oxygen at that point, it's going to spoil your mead. So by doing it this way, you're low flow, there's no bubbles, you're not introducing oxygen. So only stir for the first couple of days, don't shake, and you should make good mead that way. So we got 2 things left to talk about. Yeast. Now I have 2 different types of yeast here. I got this Red Star in the yellow packet, and this is a champagne yeast. Yeast comes in sweet, semi-sweet, and dry, and it comes with different alcohol tolerances. This particular pack is a dry yeast with a 15 to 17% alcohol tolerance, which means that alcohol by volume, 17% of this bottle will be alcohol before it's just too much for this alcohol, for these yeast to survive in. All right, that's about a 34 proof, which isn't bad for a wine. It leaves very, very little of the initial flavors behind, which is why it's called a dry. It pretty much eats up all of the sugars and all of the taste. It leaves behind alcohol. Now, one of the ones that's actually, because I don't drink alcohol myself, but I let other people sample it. This one seems to be the winner by far as taste goes. And this is Lalvin 47D, and it is a semi-sweet. So it eats up the same amount of sugars. It's also a 15 to 17% alcohol, but it leaves a lot of the flavor of the different types of honey behind. Now, I keep talking about going to the homebrew store, and this is where his knowledge will really come in. If you want a sipping wine that is 2 to 5% alcohol, but you want a really good taste, you'd have to select a particular type of yeast. And he has them all. They're about 50 cents per pack. And if you want something that has a super high alcohol content, once again, he would be able to point you out and see what ones you want to have it work for you. The last thing to talk about is well, let's throw in water real quick. I keep holding this up because this is the kind of water I use. They're about 99 cents a piece. You need one per 1 gallon of mead. It's that easy. You want the filtered. You do not want the electrolyted ones. You don't want anything extra or crazy in your water. It's just water. It's something for the yeast and the honey to float around in. You don't have to go crazy with it. The 99-cent brand stuff works just fine. So the last thing to talk about would be honey. Honey comes in a lot of varieties, and a lot of qualities, and a lot of prices. I have this one that I keep pulling up. This has already done its primary fermentation. This has been sitting for about 45 days. It's still a little foggy, but you notice that the color is this rich, deep brown. This is buckwheat honey. And then we've got this. This is blueberry honey. Has a completely different flavor context to it. You notice that it is extremely filled with lees. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is going to be the one, this and its brother is the one that's going to be transferred over tomorrow. I am sure that people who know how to make mead have said I've left out a bunch of things, and please leave your comments below. Let me know what you think I should add to any videos like this. Mostly I was trying to make sure that the people who haven't started would have the correct gear. Just the gear, not talking about water, not talking about the different prices of honey. To buy all of this and have it good to go, it would be about $94 to get yourself up and going as far as being able to make multiple batches of mead. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some information that you didn't already have. Sorry for rambling on for a half hour or so. Good luck, stay safe, and happy mead making.